Hello everybody, I'm Jason Parker. I'm the president and co-founder of Copperworks Distilling. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to do a tour. Behind the camera, and you'll hear a little bit from today, is Ethan Bratt. That's Ethan. Thanks. We're going to get started with the tour, but first I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to cover today. I'm going to walk you all the way through the brewing, the distilling, the barrel aging, and then we're going to do a tasting of the vodka, the gin, the cask finished gin, and the American single malt whiskey. We'll taste all of those. Today is going to be about a 20-minute tour and a 10-minute tasting, but we're actually going to get into more detail in subsequent events like this. Just watch this space and you'll see a whole lot more deep dives into a lot of these topics. At the end, we'll take some questions, and when I finish each section, I'll probably also ask if you have any questions. We'll briefly take a few, and then we'll move to the next section. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Ethan, you ready to walk down into the tasting, or into the production area with me?
Sounds good to me.
Let's do it. Come on this way. This is our tasting room, and we'll go through the lobby. And then into production. Come this way. So, these stills were made for us in Scotland by Forsyth. We ordered them in 2011, but it took them until 2013 to ship them through the Panama Canal and get them here for us. And that gave us time to build out the rest of this building. Be spending a little more time on the stills when we get into up on the still house deck when we talk about distilling. So the first thing you need to know about Copperworks Distilling is that it was founded by two brewers, myself, Jason Parker, and Micah Nutt. Micah and I had been home brewers together. I had also been a professional brewer at several of the Seattle iconic breweries, and we decided to make whiskey, making a beer, and then taking that beer and distilling the alcohol. The only difference is we didn't want to put hops in the beer we're going to turn into vodka, gin, and whiskey. But other than that, we made really high quality beer. And we still do, but we distill it all. We don't make any beer available in kegs or bottles, at least not yet. So here's what we do. When we built this distillery, we didn't have quite enough room to put in the quality and size of a brewery that we wanted, but that's okay because the first brewery that I ever worked at was the Pike Place Brewery. They're just right up the street, 2.5 blocks. We partner with them to make the beer that we bring down here, ferment on site, and then distill. And 29 years ago, I hired the founder of Elysium Breweries, Dick Cantwell, to help me up at Pike. We worked with their brewery down in Georgetown. And in the past 2 or 3 years, we've also been working with Fremont Brewing. These are all great breweries with really high quality brew staffs and equipment that we go over and make beer, basically. Beer with no hops. So let's talk about how we do it. Come this way, I want to show you some malt. A lot of different distilleries, you may be familiar with bourbon. Bourbon uses corn. We don't use corn. We use this stuff right here. It's called malted barley. See those little kernels? Those are barley kernels. They've been germinated, kiln dried, and then the color that they're at, the different colors, I'm going to pour this one out so you can see that. Notice the difference of how those are. They've been kilned at a different color, and they add different flavors and different aromas. In a beer, they would also add different colors. But we're going to distill everything, and so once it's gone through the distillations, it no longer has any color, but we still get different flavors and we still get different aromas. So we make 2 beer recipes. One of them is made out of 100% of the lightest, the palest malt. That's the first one we poured out. And then we have another recipe that has 5 different malt varieties. Each variety has got a different flavor, a different color, and a different reason to be in that. That's 25% of the caramel and crystal malts, and then 75% of the pale malt. We do all of that malt, all of that brewing of those malts at one of those 3 breweries. I'm going to spend a whole session sometime soon, hopefully going over all the details about brewing and our partnerships with the breweries. But right now, what we're doing is mashing in, that is converting those sugars into fermentable sugars, bringing that sweet liquid, that fermentable sugar liquid over here. It's called a wort. We pump them into our fermenters. So if you look over here, you'll see that we have the 60 barrel, that is 1,860 gallon vessels, stainless steel vessels. That's where we do the fermentation. We put brewer's yeast in there and do a 7-day fermentation. And after all that fermentation has happened, the yeast has eaten the sugars out. Yeah, let's walk over to the fermenters and take a look. The yeast has eaten all the sugars it's going to eat, and then we turn down these tanks' temperature. We can control them so that they're sweating. You see how the manway door is actually wet? That's because the temperature inside this is all the way down to 35 degrees. We have this chilling, and that's causing the yeast to drop into this cone and settle in the bottom, leaving us clear beer behind. That's the beer that we then pump into the stills. Let's walk over to the still house. Ethan, if there's any questions coming in about brewing, we can take them now. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking about.
I haven't seen any so far,
okay.
So.
All right. Come over here, and we'll go up onto the still house deck. We decided that we wanted to use Scottish stills, made in Scotland specifically for us, but made to make malt whiskey. There's a lot of great still makers out there. There's even one in Kentucky, where I'm originally from. They make great stills, but they're not famous for making malt whiskey. They're famous for making bourbon. So we had to go to Scotland to find the stills that would make really good malt whiskey. We had these hand hammered for us. This first one over here is called the wash still. I'm going to sneak by and open up this door so you can look in. What we've got inside are stainless steel coils that heat up. I don't know if you can see in there, it's pretty dark. Yeah, there you go, those are the coils. They heat up that sweet wort that we've fermented. The alcohol vapor goes up this neck, comes across that head, down this lye pipe, into this tube and shell heat exchanger, and then it comes out of the back through that faucet, hits that glass funnel, and runs down this pipe into the receiver over here, called the low wines receiver. So what we're actually collecting, just to give you some numbers, we start with a beer that is 9% alcohol. We pump about 950 gallons of that beer into this beer stripping still. After the end of the day, we've got about 320 gallons of 24% low wines. So what we've really done is just captured about a third of the volume, but all of the alcohol. What's left behind is called pot ale, and that actually isn't very good for anything. Unfortunately, it has to go down the drain. After a day of that, we take that low wines, we add what's in this middle tank. They're called feints. So I'll tell you where they come from in a minute, but we add the low wines and the feints into this other big still. Let's don't walk over there quite yet, because I want to stick around with the spirit safe here, but we're going to take a look at it in a minute. It's the big pot over there, and that is the whiskey still. That alcohol vapor comes through this condenser, comes out of that faucet, which has a handle on it. And you can see that I can actually move where that is going to come out. It can come out over here, or it can come out over here. So the distiller is going to be watching the flow rate and measuring through these little sample valves down here. They're going to be measuring the alcohol percentage. When it hits 147 proof, we make our first cut. What's been running into the feints receiver at first is called heads. But when we hit 147 proof, we cut to the spirit receiver and collect hearts. Hearts are going to become the barreled whiskey. In about 2 to 3 hours, depending on how the day is going and how much of a charge we have in the still, we'll make our last final cut to the feints receiver and collect tails. And tails are the other end. Let's just review heads, hearts, and tails. The heads and the tails are the feints, the hearts are what become the whiskey. The heads and the tails have good alcohol in them, but they don't taste good. The other things that are in there are contaminating them. So we don't want to make that into whiskey, but we do want to have a chance to get back to the alcohol that didn't come out on that first distillation. That's a pretty deep topic that I would love to spend some more time on. I'm not going to today, but we'll do a whole deep dive into that topic in particular about when you make the cuts. So what we have are now the feints, which you now know are the heads and the tails that have weird flavors and some good ethyl alcohol, and the spirit from the middle cut. The spirit will become barreled whiskey. The next batch of whiskey, we take new low wines, we add those heads and tails, the feints, and we just keep going around. We always make more distillations with a brand new batch of low wines and the previous batch of feints. Okay? That's whiskey. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's a good overview, and as I said, we'll do some more deep dives. I also want to tell you about how we make vodka and gin. So let's dive into that for a second. To make vodka or gin, you have to start with a thing called grain neutral spirit, or GNS. GNS is defined as being distilled at 190 proof or above. The whiskey that we've collected is about 137 proof. No way is it going to be considered neutral in flavor. It has lots of flavor that's going to mature. So we can't use pot stills to make grain neutral spirit. We have to use column stills. So what we do is take 2 batches of low wines, put them into the big whiskey pot, but instead of letting that alcohol come straight through to the spirit safe like we'd done before, we'll open and close some valves to force that alcohol to go sideways. Let's walk around and take a look at how this thing works. That alcohol vapor is going to be coming in through the side, down into this column, and then going up. I'll come around you and I can point to some of this stuff. So it turns out that what each in this column and in this column over here really are one giant column stacked on top of each other, but we didn't want to rent the second floor, so we had them cut in half. The first column has 8 plates. Each plate does a redistillation of alcohol. That more pure alcohol that comes out of the top of the 8th plate comes through this pipe down to the bottom of this still, this column, and then goes through 17 more plates. By the time it comes out of the top, it's now 192 proof, 96% alcohol at the beginning of the day. By the end of the day, almost an 18 to 20 hour day, because remember, this is 25 times redistilled. Each one of those plates is doing a distillation. By the time the day is over, it's a slow day, we end up with a batch of 191 proof alcohol. That is the base of vodka and gin. For vodka, we add water. We don't charcoal filter it. That would not be a good thing to do for our vodka because it would just simply turn it into a commodity. It would have no taste, but instead it brings forward the taste of that malted barley. So it's called Washington malt vodka for that reason. The vodka or the grain neutral spirit that we've made, instead of diluting it to 80 proof or 40% alcohol, we can dilute it to 50% alcohol, 100 proof, and put it into the gin still. So this is the smallest still, because really what this still is doing is not creating alcohol like all of these stills are doing, is concentrating the alcohol. I shouldn't say creating, but concentrating alcohol. This one is flavoring alcohol. We take 115 gallons of that 50% grain neutral spirit, put 25 pounds of botanicals, juniper, coriander, lemon peel, orange peel, acacia bark, orris root, angelica root, licorice root, kupa berries, and grains of paradise. So I hope you got all those down. 10 of those, we soak them for 24 hours, turn on the still, and capture that aroma and flavor coming up this long, skinny neck. As that alcohol vapor goes across into the condenser, it comes into this tank here where we collect the gin. But here's what's interesting. We don't do what is normally done in gin today. We don't have a vapor infusion basket. We do what's called maceration. It adds 24 hours to the day, and it uses about 3 times the botanicals. Most gins have a vapor infusion basket. They let the alcohol boil with no flavors in it at all. That alcohol vapor goes through those botanicals, touching it for a few seconds and pulling out the essential oils coming into the gin. It's way more efficient, but it makes very resiny gin. We didn't think that matched well with our sweet malt vodka base or GNS base, so we're doing it the old school way. Okay, I'm going to take a quick pause, and then we should walk down to the barrel aging room and talk about how we barrel age. If there's any questions about distillation, I can take them on the way back there. Otherwise, we'll talk about barrels. Grab your whiskey. Come on down. When we got this place, we thought we had more room than we'd ever need, but it turns out that we need a lot more space for our barrels. So this is only one of two places where we're aging the barrels. This is all temperature controlled. That's not something you're normally going to hear. These and all of these barrels down here, which you can see, maybe Ethan can show, we're not going to go too close because we actually drop out self-service if we go back in there. These are all mostly new charred American oak barrels. Now I say mostly because you'll also see that we have some 80-year-old sherry cask here. These are called butts. They're 500 liters. We have some cognac barrels, and some we've used port pipes and a variety of different types of casks. But most of what we start with is new charred American oak barrels. We put the whiskey in between 4 different entry proofs, 110 to 120. We let it sit in there long enough to mature, but not so long that it actually becomes just over oaked. For Copperworks, for reasons that I can't wait to share with you when we have a deep dive into barrel aging, we really can't leave whiskey in a new charred American oak barrel much longer than 3.5 years. After that, it starts getting actually too sweet, too vanilla, too caramely. So we are using our barrels a second time. And when I get into this detail in a later post about why we make the barrels specific to our distillery, it'll make a lot more sense that we can use that barrel a second time and keep the whiskey in a little longer without it becoming over oaked. I don't think when you taste our whiskey, the thing you're going to think of is it's young. You're going to think it's big and bold. And that's what's really exciting about these barrels in this warehouse. To make a blend of whiskey, we're going to take between literally 2 to 8, is about the most we've ever done, casks, and put those together. We're not blending those barrels together to be consistent, we're blending them together to be delicious. So we're always trying to make the most interesting whiskey we can make with those 2 different recipes, the different types of barrels we have, and then blending them together to be greater than the sum of their parts. Occasionally we find a barrel that we think is very balanced and we want to release it simply as a single cask. It's delicious. It may not have as much of the complexity as a small blend does, though, because those are really interesting, how diverse it can be. Unless there's any questions about barrel aging, which I'm sure there are, but we're probably going to have to dive into those in another conversation, let's go up into the tasting room and start doing a little bit of tasting. I want to run you through all of the products we've talked about.
So we had one question about tasting, and so they were wondering how could they taste with us?
Well, the easiest way to taste with is if you happen to have any of our products available, then pour with me when we go up into the tasting room and we'll be able to talk through them. If you don't have any products yet, this will be available as I guess it's a file that you can view again. And so when you get a product, if you order one, and this is a great opportunity for to mention that our online store ships to 37 states. So if there is a product that you don't have that you think we'd be interested in, we can probably ship it to you or a neighboring state, and then you can watch that and join us. We're also going to have a lot of special releases between now and the end of the year. We can't really tell you exactly how many, but let's just say more than 4 or 5. And Jeff Canoff, our vice president, is going to be working through a lot of those with you in special editions of this, tasting those and talking about the notes, how they were made and all. So we'll go up into the tasting room. Just go up the back steps. This isn't something you normally get to do when you're on a real tour with us, in-person tour. So this is the employee entrance. Why don't you go around to the front of the bar, Ethan, and I'll pour us up some. So what we're going to start with is the vodka. I want you to understand the difference between a filtered, high distilled, multiple distilled so that no flavor is left in it, commodity vodka versus a craft vodka that is literally keeping the flavors of the grain or the ingredients it was at. From Copperworks, it's always about the malt and the brewer's yeast. So this is not charcoal filtered, and it is at 80 proof, so 40% alcohol. We like to roll it a little bit so that you get some coating on the inside. It's not advisable to really slosh it too much, just roll it, and that'll get everything wet. And then you can smell. Don't bury your nose in these. These are called Glencairn glasses. We like them because they are good for concentrating the aroma. But remember, we're starting at 40% alcohol and we're going to go upwards to 50%. So you don't need to get too deep in there to smell it. When you smell, you're actually going to smell something. It doesn't smell like rubbing alcohol. It smells like fruit. It smells like grain. But in particular, it smells like, gosh, I'm going to say a little bit of banana, a little bit of citrus rind, and it's smooth smelling. And tasting is incredibly different than what I would call a commodity vodka, which are usually hot, they burn the tongue. This is sweet, it coats the mouth. It really doesn't burn at all. It's surprising to think that you're drinking straight 40% alcohol. We like to use this vodka in cocktails that would normally not feature the flavor of a vodka, but instead can have that sweet and kind of vanilla note. A good example is a Moscow Mule. Normally a Moscow Mule is just a great way to get a buzz off of cranberry juice, or a ginger beer, I should say. Cranberry juice is another example of cranberry and vodka. You can actually taste this vodka. Just nice little flavors in there. Okay, we're gonna move on to another one. I'm gonna move to gin now. In order for us to taste gin, you remember that it has been vodka that has been redistilled after soaking botanicals. We put those 10 botanicals in and we soak for 24 hours, which is quite a long time, but it allows a lot of the flavors to get into that alcohol, a lot of the aromas. We redistill it. It comes out of the still at 157 proof is the batch we collect, but then we cut it with deionized water down to 94 proof, so 47% alcohol. Give that a little roll. Give that a smell. Oh yeah. Of course, it does have the smell of a forest, right? It wouldn't be gin if it didn't have juniper in it. So the predominant botanical, remember I said 25 pounds, 18 and a half of them are juniper. But it doesn't taste like a pine cone. It has citrus peel and all the various different barks. It has this nice little pepper note in the back. That's the grains of paradise. And this sort of menthol or eucalyptus note, that's the kubab berries and a little peppercorn out of India. All of those are balanced to make a curve of flavor. It starts out sweet, goes through citrus, it's that mint note, and then dries out your mouth. The last thing that happens in here is that your mouth actually starts to water. You almost salivate due to the fact that we put grains of paradise, a little peppercorn out of Morocco in there. It doesn't have flavor, it has this heat that dries out the mouth, making it not so thick at the end. So you're ready for the next drink, okay? Gin is always clear, but if you put it in a barrel, it's gonna come out with color. So here is a gin that was made exactly from the first gin, but we put it in a brand new charred American oak barrel. That's all we did. And we only left it in for 3.5 months. We weren't trying to mature it, we're trying to color and flavor it with that new barrel flavor. Look at how much color it got in only 3.5 months, 100 days. Here is that. We bottle this gin, it's called the New Oak Gin. We bottle this gin at 100 proof because you can actually replace whiskey with this gin in whiskey cocktails, like an old fashioned or a Sazerac. Actually, my favorite version of the Sazerac is made from this gin. Give that a roll. You get kind of a burnt orange nose out of there. There's, of course, cinnamon coming out. But there's these flavors and aromas that you wouldn't normally think of coming from gin. You would normally think of them coming from whiskey. But because all of this is made from malted barley flavor, so it's sort of a combination of these two. We really like to use this in whiskey cocktails, but also in traditional gin cocktails. If you make a Negroni out of this, it's going to be a very different Negroni. It's fun to play around with something you're used to. The only one that I don't really experiment much with is gin and tonic. I still like the traditional gin in a Bradley's Kenotonic Syrup gin and tonic. That is my favorite gin and tonic. Okay, I'm going to change glasses because we're going to move to whiskey now, and we don't want you drinking out of a gin glass. Whiskey. Remember us saying that whiskey is a blend of different barrels. We usually take between 2 and 8, generally it's between 4 and 8 barrels. We mingle them together to make the flavors that we're looking for this release. Again, we're not looking for consistency, we're looking for the most delicious whiskey we can make. So we number each one with a little number on the end of the label. This is our 31st batch of whiskey. It's not the same as any whiskeys we've ever made before, and we'll never be able to make it again. So each time this whiskey comes out, it's a new whiskey. It's still a single malt whiskey, which I haven't gone into all the details on that, and I'm going to do that on a different blog, but I will tell you all about that later. But it is, we show on here the different grains that we use, the different barrel types, how many months it was aged, and what its proof is. We even have the bottle number because each one of these is hand labeled. This one is at 100 proof, and this one actually has 3 different grains. I'm sorry, just 2, the 5 malt and the full pint recipe. It was aged in 7 different casks. For the youngest cask was 32 months, and this is 100 proof. So give that a roll. And then a smell. Lots of fruit. One of the classic Copperworks aromas is an orange and sort of an orange peel or almost orange pith note. Lots of wood, lots of vanilla, but a lot of fruit coming out of there. What's really exciting about being able to drink single malt whiskeys at 100 proof is that normally they burn. Normally they're just too hot. The reason that this is not as hot as, say, a bourbon or a scotch would be is all the way back to that fermentation cycle. Since we're using a brewer's yeast, it doesn't make as much alcohol. It leaves residual sugars behind. They make it all the way through distillation into the barrel and then become part of the whiskey that we release. That sugar not only coats the mouth, but it adds complexity that you just can't get when all you have is ethyl alcohol. So this is a type of whiskey that I expect is going to be coming a lot more as brewers become distillers. You remember us saying that we were brewers who have become distillers? So in each bottle we write, from great brewing comes great spirits, and that's how this whole thing started, and that's what we do, is we make a beer into whiskey, vodka, and gin. Well, remember that we do ship, that we are open. We're not open in the tasting room at the moment for you to visit, so this is a good way for you to learn a little bit about what we're doing. Thank you for joining us. We'll take a couple of questions if you have any, and then we'll see you the next week.
So far, we've only had one question, and that was about our Cal Isla gin that we have.
Oh, yeah. Let's
you want to do a short
those.
explanation
of that? So we
of that?
actually have 2 gins. You remember me saying that we've done a brand new charred American oak barrel? Well, we've also done about 20 different experiments where we've taken fresh gin, and instead of putting them in a new barrel, we've put them into a previously used barrel. It could have had rum in it, port in it, cognac in it, mezcal, calvados, all sorts of things, but the last 2, and they're still available, a few cases of them are still available online, are Kalila whiskey, so a very peated whiskey from Scotland, Islay, region of Scotland, and Lagavulin. No, Lafroig. Yes, Lafroig. God, sorry. And the Lafroig is even more smoky, and Lafroig is quite strong in that peat note. So those 2 are available. Jeff is going to be doing a presentation on those 2 gins for you next Friday. So look for that, look for an announcement on that. Well, again, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry we can't meet in person. I look forward to seeing you again when that day comes. Take care. Thanks a lot.
Oh, there's one other question. What's our distribution footprint?
Right now, Washington State is our distribution. We will be distributing perhaps this next year through small distributors in some other areas. But the easiest way to get us is definitely online if you can't make it down to your Washington grocery store or liquor store, then look for us online in 37 states.
Wonderful. And that looks to be the last question.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Sláinte.